podcast about the world and current social issues. This is where we talk about things that are happening out there. Today, let's talk about one of the world's greatest ills. Not long ago, I saw a documentary on human trafficking, and the numbers for it are staggering to say the least. I'd like to start by saying that the term human trafficking is kind of misunderstood. Human trafficking is everything from sex slavery to labor workers. It is used in a lot of ways, even by governments to harvest resources, much like North Korea. Even still, people are being forced to work for someone without pay or the freedom to leave the situation. So, just for context, a case most people aren't aware of is the construction of Dubai. The documentary I saw was by Vice. The construction workers were forced to live outside of the city in overcrowded housing. The Saudi Arabian agencies recruited workers from India with the promise of high pay. They had to sign contracts that they couldn't read, which contained the actual agreement. They were forced to pay astronomical visa fees, though through the company, which is illegal, and were expected to renew them every year. They were also asked to turn their passports into the company. They can't leave the country, they can't support themselves or provide for their families. This, by definition, is considered human trafficking. Underdeveloped countries aren't the only ones that have been plagued by the issue. Even America is affected. Here in America, we don't really struggle with slave labor or the trafficking of child soldiers. Sex trafficking has been plaguing America since the country's inception and still occurs to this day. The worst offender is Atlanta, Georgia, which I read on CNN's website. Atlanta's prostitution and sex trafficking industry makes almost $290 million every year. That's Atlanta alone. There's traffickers in the city that are making over $35,000 every week. There doesn't seem to be much being done about it either. According to the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS encourages Americans to see something and say something and just give us all a public hotline. It could be worse, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be better either. In Russia, they've repeatedly imprisoned women for prostitution who were being forced into it, subsidized no programs for rehab whatsoever, and cracked down on, quote, civil society, which shut down women's shelters and rehab clinics. This isn't the extent of the issue either. Russian government has continually worked with North Korea in order to allow North Korea to set up labor camps and resource pipelines in eastern Russia. I read an article by the Washington Post that said the country has something close to 2.6 million slaves that live in labor camps. The article also mentioned that the UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights has said that North Korea does not have any parallel in the contemporary world because of the scale of its human rights violations. Quote. That's a direct quote. Okay. This, quote, developed country has deprived people of so many basic human rights that the United Nations cannot recognize it as a first world country. Think about that for a minute. The slavery data is apparently at a point that can justify international pressure being put on the country and its leader. Apparently, the government has released some of its prisoners on amnesty like they did in 2017, but it's a negligible number. It's widely known that slavery is one of the most horrible crimes that someone can commit, but the international community seems to be incapable of putting enough pressure on anyone to make a change. The only question to ask is, how will it all end? That's just food for thought for everybody at home, I suppose. I always look for some kind of explanation as to why the world is the way that it is. As far as I can tell, there's no reason for it. I think that Alan Watts explains it best. I suppose that's just my own opinion. This has been the Mitch Kenny podcast about the world and current social issues. Thank you for listening.